G'day guys and gal! Everyone loves the Death Korps of Krieg, except the Death Korps of Krieg. These dudes and dudettes despise themselves so much that their only goal in life is to die, and for some reason, we find that cute. We need help. Hence I was thinking about a video I could make on them, but they don't really have chapters or regiments, it's just kinda the Death Korps of Krieg. And due to their characters being a bunch of humorless vat-grown clones that wear gas masks 24/7, it's kinda hard to drill down on specific characters. But then it hit me. The Siege of Vraks. An amazing showcase of the Death Korps, whilst also being a fan favourite moment in the lore. On top of that, the only person who's really covered it is Arch, but he did so in a 43-part series that would nearly take 2 days to watch. To his credit, I heard that he did a good job of it, but I don't have that kind of time, and even if I did, having to listen to Arch speak for that long would make my attitude towards life align with that of the Kriegsmen. So I thought, bugger it. I can do it in 20 minutes with twice the charm and 100th of the patience. We speedrunning this shit, boy. Speaking of Arch, guys and gal, we're just over 10,000 subs away from claiming his skull. At this rate, that's about 1 month away. Ever since I was a simple zygote in my mother's uterus, this has been my dream. And boy do I have a fun video planned for when we do overtake him. So grab your cat, grab your cock, and grab your fake online e-girlfriend and smash that juicy red button. Finish line is in sight and boy, will it taste good. Today we'll go over the Siege of Vraks, what the setup was, why it was such a big thing in the lore, and what was the end result. We'll be paying special attention to the Death Korps of Krieg, cause you know, they're fucking awesome. Let's get into it. To set the scene, it's the 41st millennium. The galaxy is going through some shit, and all the heroes and factions we know and love are out and about. The world of Vraks Prime existed as an important armory world that was led by a newly appointed cardinal called Zafan. See, there's the first issue. An entire star system ruled by a kitty fiddlin' priest never goes well. Old mate Zafan decided to do a tour of the system to see what worlds were now under his control and, well, the tour escalated. Due to his intense faith and charisma, he kinda ended up inspiring extreme religious zealousy and holy uprisings to take place on all the worlds he saw. This started off kinda good. Corrupt, faithless governments and tyrants were toppled, reignited their love for the Emperor and their loyalty towards the Imperium. Cardinal Zafan was like, no shit, this is pretty cool. I could totally stop molesting kids and instead use my faith and influence to wipe out all heretics. However, this is Warhammer 40k we're talking about. Shit always goes south. One of Zafan's closest advisors, Deacon Marmon, was a secret chaos worshipper who slowly but surely twisted the Cardinal's perception. He convinced the Cardinal that he was the chosen one, a living saint of the Emperor, and that his vision of heresy was absolute. The extremism set in, and the Cardinal decided that it was time for another holy war against the faithless. The issue though is that by this point, the Cardinal's definition of the faithless was pretty different to a lot of others. He took his huge following to Vraks Prime, where he was able to sway the entire planet into believing in him, other than the Adeptus Arbites, but those dudes were always going to be a tough nut to crack. The Inquisition was like, fuck this guy, so they sent a Vindicare assassin to snipe him. However, due to some fancy self-defense device, the bullet was blocked, and the Cardinal survived. The attempted assassination did seem to back up the Cardinal's point though, hence the entirety of Vraks exploded into rebellion and quickly seceded from the Imperium. Whoops. At this point there wasn't obvious signs of chaos corruption, just a crazy Cardinal who was abusing his power. The world was too defended to just orbitally bomb, plus it was a key supply world, so the Imperium preferred to maintain its infrastructure, hence the Death Korps of Krieg were deployed. Unbreakable men and women with hard-ons for trenches and barbed wire. It was a match made in heaven. The war was to be simple. Send in a bunch of Kriegsmen, watch a lot of Kriegsmen die, watch a lot of Kriegsmen kick ass, and claim victory within 12 years. Yeah, needless to say, that didn't fucking happen. I mean, the Kriegsmen dying and kicking ass part did, but the 12 years, not so much. The Cardinal's army was made up of about 8 million soldiers that were reasonably well armed and trained. They had a lot of supplies and ample time to prepare. They were dug in as fuck. The Imperium was right to send in the Death Korps, but it wasn't taking Vraks super seriously. They had run the numbers and were confident in their victory. The commanding officer for the siege was also a young untested man who was put there due to his family's influence and power. They would later come to regret this act of nepotism. Actually landing on the planet wasn't too hard. The Cardinal had grouped his entire fuck-huge army into one multi-layered stronghold, and he didn't have a fleet to prevent the Imperium's arrival, hence millions of soldiers landed and prepared for war, only a couple thousand Ks away from their final target, the Citadel. The war began with the noise of 1,000 Earthshaker cannons opening fire. Both sides began to bomb the shit out of each other. Due to the long range difference, the majority of the shells missed. Using this engagement as a distraction, the Death Korps of Krieg advanced in the enemy position and began setting up trenches to get closer to the target. Over the next little while, these trenches got closer and closer to the enemy's position, whilst artillery and supplies were slowly moved up as well. After a shitload more shelling, and when I say a shitload I mean it, the first of the Death Korps of Krieg bayonet charged at the enemy lines. This did not go well. Thousands of Kriegsmen were cut down by an onslaught of bullets and bombs. Those that had somehow made it to the enemy lines were torn apart by the zealous defenders. Despite literally getting caked in the gore of their fellow Kriegsmen, the second wave of men charged without hesitation and died without hesitation. It was an unstoppable force versus an immovable object situation. Both sides had unlimited morale, so suicidal charges were a huge vibe. After a lot of death, the Kriegsmen stopped charging, which the heretics took as an invitation to have their own suicidal charge. Yeah, needless to say, charging a Kriegsman in his own trench is a terrible idea. Hence the heretics died like the sons of whores they were. By the end of the first 3 days, the sight of mangled corpses and stench of death and gunpowder coated the entire battlefield. The war entered a stalemate. Neither side committed to an all-in charge for over a year, as they instead bombed, sniped, and raided each other where they could. Despite the lack of Leroy Jenkins tier charging, thousands were still dying each day. Eventually the Death Korps were able to break through a small chink in the heretics' armor. Some Kriegsmen got into the enemy bunkers and desperately fought to hold their gains, whilst reinforcements arrived. If it had been anyone else, the heretics could have pushed them out and resumed the stalemate, but these were the guys and gal of Krieg. More Kriegsmen poured into the breach, and after some intense close-quarter combat, which involved a lot of flamethrowers and bludgeoning bitches with shovels, the outer walls and defenses of Vraks had fallen. It appeared to be time to attack the second layer of defense, except it fucking wasn't. A huge enemy counterattack was launched that caught the Imperial forces off guard. Dozens of thousands on each side died daily as the war turned into an absolute mess. Consolidating ground became nearly impossible. This back and forth battle continued for quite a long time, both sides gaining then giving up ground. It honestly made the first part of the war look like a jello fight with a Brazilian prostitute. After 7 years of fighting, shit hit the fan.
But Majorkill, I feel like the shit had already hit the fan. You know, cause millions of people had died.
Shut your fucking mouth, Timmy, before I sign you up to singing Cardinal Zafan's sermons. Yes, things had been hectic, but it was about to get even more so. See, a bunch of Alpha Legionnaires came out of fucking nowhere and bolstered the defenders of Vraks. The reasoning is not entirely clear, as the appearance of the Traitor Marines sparked an extreme response for the Imperium in turn. I believe that Omegon sent those Marines in to make the Imperium take Vraks more seriously, so the Imperium could achieve victory. Cause you know Omegon, or maybe Alfarius, is loyalist. The first to answer this call were the Dark Angels. Oh shit! Who quickly went about sabotaging and taking over the enemy's starport, which deprived the enemy of easy access to off-world reinforcements and supplies. This is Vraks though, so while I do stand by the fact that it was quick, a shitload of Dark Angels died, a mega fucktillion heretics died, and a whole bunch of Alpha Legionnaires died. After 9 years, there was no end in sight, and the grueling high casualty war continued. Each meter of ground that the Death Korps of Krieg claimed could be measured in the blood of thousands. But eventually, through extreme effort and strokes of tactical genius, the heretics were losing ground. If it wasn't abundantly clear by now, Cardinal Zafan was now a chaos-worshipping fanatic. I love the jump from, I am literally Jesus, to, I suck Satan's cock, that he did, but hey, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. With his mortal army failing him, Zerfan allowed his chaotic sorcerers to perform their magic. Foremost, they sent out a signal, an invitation. Vraks was a fucking blood orgy and everyone is invited. A huge armada of chaos ships formed and beeline for Vraks. Despite a valiant effort by Imperial ships to stop them, the armada was able to unload a shitload of bad guys onto the planet, including World Eaters and Iron Warrior Space Marines. Shit just hit the fan. again. While the Chaos Fleet had been heading over, the legendary armies of Krieg once again attacked the enemy's position. The Citadel was the most fortified structure on the planet by far, and taking it would be a bitch, but for the last decade, Krieg had been fucking bitches, so they charged onwards and inch by inch made more and more ground. And that's when it all went to hell. The huge load of bad guys had arrived, and they did so in style. All the gains that the armies of the Imperium had suffered for years to make were wiped out in an instant. Knight berserkers tore through Kriegsmen like butter. The Death Korps fought on valiantly, but they just weren't ready for this kind of shit. The enemy's outer defenses were re-established, and the end of the war, which was in sight, was now cast into doubt. It now appeared that a genuine Chaos victory was more than possible. Oh yeah, and the traitors had brought Titans with them. Feck. With things in such a disastrous state, the High Commander of the Siege of Vraks was fired and replaced with a much more experienced and trusted leader. He requested the support of Titans, more firepower, and more soldiers as the Death Guard began arriving on Vraks and turning large parts of it into a decayed cesspit. At this point, it wasn't even the Siege of Vraks anymore, it was the clusterfuck of Vraks. There was no defined battle lines, and the objective wasn't even to take the Citadel anymore. It was to survive until the Titans arrived, and then hopefully they could do their work. The Cardinal wasn't remotely in charge anymore. He had no command over any of the traitor Space Marines running around, nor did he control the legions of cultists, mutants, and beastmen they had brought with them. Even his own men were kind of doing their own thing, so no, he just sat in his bunker, poured himself a pint, and waited for the whole thing to blow over. The Imperium was tired, worn down and wounded, and incredibly pissed off. So very pissed off. So pissed in fact that they were like, fuck this shit, let's counterattack. So after a year of consolidating and preparing, they sent in everything they had. All the men, tanks, titans and bombs that they could. Once more the men and women of Krieg charge, bayonets ready, into oblivion. Ground was gained, many died, Titans fought Titans as Chaos Marines tore through Guardsmen. It was pretty fucking sweet. After a few days, the Loyalists were winning. A dozen chaotic Titans brought down, a ton of dead traitor Marines, and countless heretical cocksuckers were massacred. Things were looking up, but the war was not yet done. At the same time as that engagement, the Imperial forces had sent thousands of men to dig underground and blow up a bunch of shit. After a year of digging and dying, hard to run away from a Knight berserker when you're underground, they also succeeded, and boy did they blow some shit up. As we know by now, any progress the armies of the Imperium would make would be short-lived, and sure enough, the next line of defense appeared to be impossible to crack. The enemy had plenty of planes, fortifications, and a way better position. On top of that, the Chaos Space Marines were still wrecking absolute tits. Not all the Titans could be committed to the curtain wall, as they were still needed on the flanks, especially the ones where Chaos Astartes were present. Another year passed, millions more died, and next to no ground was gained. The Imperial forces were out of the come zone, but the result of the war was still uncertain. They needed that special source to break through. The fact that the High Lords of Terror were no longer vibing Vraks and would begin to reduce the amount of resources available, hence extending the siege out for a dozen more years, didn't help at all. The High Commander was like, fuck, and he knew that he had about a year or two to win the war or it would never be won. Hence he enlisted the aid of the Red Scorpion Space Marines, who were like, fuck yeah, and then they just straight up teleported a bunch of Terminators into the heart of the enemy forces. Metal as fuck. The enemy was in disarray, which is common when a bunch of Terminators teleport right in front of you and murder the shit out of you and your mates. With this breach in the enemy lines secured, progress could once again be made, and holy shit, no expense was spared. It kind of feels like I'm that dude from that old surf video.
You just drop in and just smack the lip, drop down, snap,
with how I'm explaining these battles, but that's kind of how it was. Led by an army of Space Marines, the Death Korps of Krieg, a fuckload of tanks, and some Titans, the Imperial forces were able to push through to the next line of defense. All that stood in the Imperium's path to the Citadel was the Great Curtain Wall. The Red Scorpions withdrew to honor their dead, and victory was in sight. Until it fucking wasn't, so the Inquisition saw the future. And the future said that in an act of bad sportsmanship, the last defenders of Vraks would let demons rape their tits and turn the entire planet into a demon world, which would be a huge pain in the ass for the Imperium. Hence Inquisitor Lord Hector Rex took command of the entire war, adding inquisitorial troops, including fucking Grey Knights, to the effort. The Red Hunters, who who drink Inquisitor cum like Kool-Aid, also joined the effort, whilst envoys were sent out to see if the Dark Angels and the Red Scorpions wanted to return to Vraks to finish what they started. There would be one final mega push, the Battle of all battles. All the defenders had gathered to protect the curtain wall. Plague zombies rose in their thousands. Khornite berserkers prepared to charge. Absolute chaos erupted as toxic gas, lasfire, and the unending thum of artillery exploded everywhere. Thousands more died, and finally, after over a decade of fighting, the defenders' morale began to collapse as defeat seemed inevitable. But Lord Zulfor, the leader of the Skulltakers, who were a Khornite warband, wouldn't have a bar of it. Zulfor began to unite the various chaotic warbands into a unified force. It's kinda ironic that a Khornite berserker would be the one to do that. He killed numerous Chaos Lords and took their forces for himself, before throwing Cardinal Zafan into a cage. He was now lord of whatever was left of Vraks, and he intended to inflict as much death and bloodshed as possible with a unified force and the potential for a fuck-huge demonic army at his back if he could build a warp portal in time. While Zulfor was staging his coup, the defenders on the curtain wall finally collapsed. Too many had died. They had no more food or ammunition. After penetrating wall after wall, line after line, the Citadel was in sight, the final target to bring this vicious war to an end. After some preparation and political meddling by external forces, what was left of the armies of Krieg charged forward onto their final target, as the united force of Lord Zulfor charged out to meet them. A huge battle raged, where demonic activity was becoming more and more apparent. The Grey Knights, who had been in reserve, were finally deployed and they joined the fighting. This battle would go on for months. I'm honestly beyond describing how fucked it is. I just feel exhausted thinking about that. When you hear the phrase final push, you think, oh yeah, a couple hours, last push, win the day. Nah, not at Vraks, where a final push can take years. The Imperial forces reached the Citadel and they began climbing up its slopes. This would be the most vicious part of the entire war. Honestly, you'd have a higher survival rate if you jumped into a meat grinder than this final part of the story. The Death Korps of Krieg knew this and pushed onwards anyway. Each meter of ground they claimed was met with disaster. Trap after trap was sprung, and even loyalist space marines were like lambs to the slaughter, with the Red Hunters losing 150 brothers in one engagement. Even the god machines of Mars were being taken down. Still, the attackers push onwards, with the Lord Inquisitor Hector Rex personally leading the battle from the front. It was only due to his efforts and the Grey Knights that they were finally able to get a good foothold in the Citadel, but the battle was far from over. For the next part of the most drawn-out final push in the history of Warhammer lore, the Red Scorpions had returned in force, and were ready to finish what they started 5 years ago. The assistance of the Red Scorpions was a huge asset for the Loyalists, as it forced the Defenders, or whatever the fuck was left of them, to reveal their trap card, an entire legion of Khornite demons. Nice. The Red Scorpions fought through the demons and secured their objective. Now it was up to Lord Hector Rex and his Grey Knights to push through the front, whilst an army of Kriegsmen breached the underground catacombs and launched their attack from there. Now Hector wasn't just some snotty-nosed inquisitor. The man was a beast and was personally blessed by the Emperor. Like, he wore hectic inquisitor power armor and he led Grey Knights from the front. As Hector and friends cut their way through brass demons, bloodletters and other nasty red things, boss music started playing. Angrath, the mightiest of the bloodthirsters, emerged and he licked some Grey Knight tits. Almost the entirety of Hector's Astartes squad was wiped until it was just him and the angry demon. Hector, being the beast that he is, somehow managed to 1v1 the greatest bloodthirster around, and he sent the monster screaming back to hell. As Angrath was banished, the Dark Angel successor chapter, the Angels of Absolution, arrived. They were like, yo, we will help you, but we call dibs on the Alpha Legionnaires. And Hector was like, what? Why? You know what? Fuck it. Sure, you can have him. I am sick of this shit. With Angrath banished and the Angels' arrival, the battle was more of a massacre than anything. Very few traitor marines remained, most had died and even more had fled. Even Zulfor, the Lord of Khorne, had left the planet. His objective to rack up the highest possible body count had been achieved. Ironically, the Alpha Legionnaires who first arrived on Vraks and who invited all the other traitor marines to join the fun were still around. That's right, the slippery Alpha Legion performed a last stand and were cut down and captured to the man by the Dark Angels, whilst the Berserkers of Khorne retreated to fight another day. What the fuck? So by this point, the last of the defenders were literally just batshit insane mutants who had been twisted by the warp. The last time a sane heretical soldier had been encountered on Vraks was some time ago. Whilst these demonic defenders were able to give you nightmares, they were no match for the Death Korps of Krieg with their Space Marine allies. Soon the last of the demons were banished and their warp portal was destroyed. Any remaining defenders were put out of their misery. The cardinal who started it all, Mr. Zarfan, was found, and boy oh boy did he get his share of karma. He had been turned into, I kid you not, a Down syndrome mass of writhing tentacles. Not in like a boss battle way, I mean in like a severely disabled way. The Grey Knights incinerated him. 14 million dead Kriegsmen, all 8 million defenders killed, hundreds of Space Marines lost, dozens of Titans fallen, countless tanks destroyed, and millions upon millions of artillery shells expended. For the entire 17 years, there was non-stop artillery bombardment. The Death Korps of Krieg had been sent feet first into hell, and they had emerged on the other side. No other regiment could have achieved what they did. No other regiment would be able to endure the horrors of Vraks and come out sane. They had fought every nightmare Chaos had to throw at them, and they were not found wanting. The siege of Vraks wasn't a planet-wide war, it was literally a siege of one hyper-defended fortress. By the end of the war, Vraks was so damaged and corrupted that any hopes of reclaiming its armories and supplies was long gone. The entire system was put into quarantine and declared a no-fly zone, and the veterans of Vraks were shipped off to new war zones soon after. So what did we learn today, team? Well, sometimes just exterminating your problems at the start is the way to go. Electing religious fanatics as leaders isn't a smart idea, and using an army of 15-year-old vat-grown clones with gas mask glued to their face is fucking awesome. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then Patreon is the place to be. Where only $1 per month give you access to a boatload of hentai, including this original piece, which is suitably named The Death Whores of, Craig. Yeah, I don't think Craig's copyrighted. Hit the subscribe button, then hit the real subscribe button for more explosive content that induces mass death. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.